How humble are you? Do you serve others unconditionally? How can you exercise more humility in your life? How does your temperament enable you to be humble of heart, mind, and spirit? We'll be talking about these topics and much more today. One of my first episodes of Catholics on Campus, number 7, focused on the virtue of magnanimity. It's a sub-virtue of fortitude, and it's unique because it elevates the other virtues to greatness of heart. Now, here we are at episode 74, and I want to talk about another virtue that everyone needs to have: humility. Humility is the willingness to live in accordance with the truth. When humility is partnered with magnanimity, it's a powerful combination. In his 2014 book, Virtuous Leadership: An Agenda for Personal Excellence, Dr. Alexandre Havard says that magnanimity and humility define the leader. Since I believe everyone has the capacity to be a leader, this virtuous combo is essential for you too. Here's what Dr. Havard says about humility. Quote, "Humility is the habit of living the truth about one's metaphysical condition and one's strengths and weaknesses. It is also the habit of service to family and friends, colleagues and clients, society at large, and indeed all of humanity. Humility fosters in leaders the ambition to serve unconditionally."
Welcome to the Catholics on Campus podcast, where certified Catholic mindset coach and college student development expert Dr. Virginia Cook provides practical tips and coaching to succeed in college while growing in your Catholic faith. And now, your host, Virginia Cook.
Welcome back to the podcast, my friends. The virtue of humility may not be a hot topic of conversation, but it's an important one if you want to have a life rooted in what is good, true, and beautiful. As a Catholic on campus about to start a new semester or academic year, you might be getting a serving of humble pie on your table right now. Starting new things can be very humbling. St. Thomas Aquinas describes humility as the virtue that keeps us within the truth about ourselves. We neither exaggerate our greatness nor deny the gifts God has given us. Humility isn't saying, "I'm terrible at everything," or refusing to accept compliments. Instead, humility recognizes two truths at the same time. First, every good thing we have ultimately comes from God. And second, God has genuinely entrusted each of us with unique gifts for His glory. C.S. Lewis wrote, "Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less." Let me repeat that. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. I love that. Humility redirects our attention toward God and toward serving others. The Catechism of the Catholic Church reminds us that pride is the root of many sins because pride turns our attention inward. Humility redirects our attention outward toward God and toward serving others. One habit of pride is comparing yourself to others. Researchers have found that social comparison is consistently associated with lower personal well-being, lower life satisfaction, lower self-esteem, higher anxiety, more depressive symptoms, greater loneliness, and more envy. And this relationship has been replicated across cultures and age groups. The more your identity depends on outperforming others, the less stable your happiness becomes. Perhaps an example most college students are familiar with is the negative impact of social media. Jonathan Haidt summarizes much of this research on social comparison in his best-selling book, The Anxious Generation. He writes that social media has fundamentally changed adolescence and young adult development by increasing social comparison and reducing real-world relationships. Psychologists talk about two types of comparison: upward comparison and downward comparison. Upward comparison includes thoughts like, I wish I were more like them. Researchers found that people naturally compare upward on platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. Instead of comparing themselves to average peers, they compare themselves to carefully curated highlight reels of people's lives, resulting in increased envy, fear of missing out, lower body satisfaction, lower academic performance, less gratitude, and reduced subjective well being. How can you shift from upward comparison to a healthier perspective? The difference is in your mindset. If you can view another person's success as inspiring rather than threatening, upward comparison can increase your motivation. Now, downward comparison can increase happiness, but often for the wrong reason. It sounds like, well, I'm doing better than they are. It temporarily boosts one's self esteem, but the boost is short lived and superficial. This notion of downward comparison reminds me of Jesus' parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector in Luke chapter 18. It illustrates the trap of social comparison. You might remember the story. The Pharisee goes to pray and says this prayer out loud to himself. He says, "Oh God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity, greedy, dishonest, adulterous, or even like this tax collector who happened to be praying beside him or not too far away from him." He says, I fast twice a week. I pay tithes on my whole income. Evidently, not everybody did that. But the tax collector stood off at the distance and would not even raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast and he prayed, "O God, be merciful to me, a sinner." Jesus said, I tell you, the latter went home justified, not the former. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Pretty powerful stuff. Psychologists tell us that comparison often steals our happiness. And Jesus went even deeper. Comparison can also steal our humility. The Pharisee wasn't grateful for God's grace. He was grateful that he wasn't like somebody else. Humility brings us to stop asking, how do I compare? And to start asking, Lord, how can I be more like you? Now, St. Paul echoed this sentiment when he wrote to the Philippians, quote, do nothing out of selfishness or out of vainglory, rather humbly regard others as more important than yourselves, unquote. St. Paul then points out that Christ himself had emptied himself and humbled himself because he was obedient to death, even death on a cross. Another way to combat social comparison is with gratitude. One of positive psychology's most replicated findings is that gratitude interrupts comparison. When people intentionally notice gifts they already possess, they become less focused on what others have. I think this is really well illustrated when we look at the temperaments, and I want to spend some time talking about the temperaments. If you haven't listened to some of my podcasts on temperaments in the past, I invite you to go back and I think there's at least 4 of them talking about temperaments. Temperaments are the broad pattern in how we naturally respond to people, challenges, and the world around us. There's 4 traditional names for these temperaments: sanguine, choleric, melancholic, and phlegmatic. Most people are a blend of 2 of the temperaments rather than fitting neatly into one category. But usually when we talk about the temperaments, we talk about your primary or your most dominant temperament. Let's use the temperaments as a framework to take a deeper dive into understanding how you can strive to incorporate more humility into your life. So first, let's talk about sanguines. If you are a sanguine, you may actually find that some aspects of humility are relatively natural. You probably enjoy encouraging other people. You could celebrate somebody else's successes, and you may be generous with compliments and genuinely happy when somebody else does well. But your challenge may be when you begin to wonder, well, did they notice me? Did they appreciate what I did? Did they like me? Your temptation toward pride may not look like arrogance. It may look more like a desire for affirmation. If you're a sanguine, One of the best ways you can grow in humility is to learn to do good without needing to be noticed for it. Jesus gives us a beautiful example about this in Matthew 6 when he talks about giving, praying, and fasting without doing those things for the admiration of others. So try this. What if you could do something beautiful for God today that nobody else would know that you did? It'd just be between you and God. Perhaps you can serve somebody anonymously. You could encourage somebody without taking credit. You could do something generous without posting about it. You're learning to move from see me to see God. Your enthusiasm, warmth, and ability to encourage others are gifts from God. And humility doesn't mean hiding those gifts, it means using them for God's glory rather than for your own recognition. So now let's look at cholerics. You might have a little bit different struggle with humility, probably comfortable with taking responsibility, and you see what needs to be done and you're willing to do it. You're decisive, confident, ambitious, and willing to lead. Now, those are all good things. Cholerics step up when leadership is needed. Your challenge comes when confidence becomes self sufficiency. You may find yourself thinking, I know what needs to be done, or I can do this myself, or why are we spending so much time talking about it? Let's get going. Perhaps one of the hardest ones that you might be thinking is, I don't need anyone's help. If you're a choleric, your path toward humility is not about less confidence. It's learning that your strength is a gift, not a possession. Jesus tells his disciples, whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And that's from Matthew chapter 20. So practice listening before you lead. Ask someone you trust for advice, even when you think you might already know the answer. And give somebody else the opportunity to lead or take the initiative. And learn those 3 incredibly difficult words, I was wrong. You don't have to follow them with a 5-minute explanation of why you're actually right. Your challenge is to move from I can do this to God use me. You don't need to become less strong. You need to allow your strength to become service. Now, if you are melancholic, your struggle with humility may be much less obvious. You may actually spend a great deal of time thinking about your weaknesses. You notice your mistakes. You recognize where you could have done better. You might compare yourself with others and think to yourself, I'm not good enough, or I should have done better, or everyone else seems to be more capable than I am. Now, keep this top of mind. Self criticism is not the same thing as humility. Humility means walking with the truth, and the truth is that you have weaknesses. We all do. But the truth is also that God has given you gifts, and both can be true. You don't become more humble by pretending that your gifts don't exist. In fact, if God has given you a particular ability, refusing to acknowledge it actually becomes a form of false humility. So if you are melancholic, practice receiving a compliment. Instead of saying, oh no, it really wasn't that good, just tries to simply say, thank you. I'm grateful that God allowed me to contribute, or something along those lines. You don't have to take all the glory for yourself, but you don't have to give away the glory that properly belongs to the gifts God has given you. Your challenge is to move from I'm not good enough to I'm God's beloved child with both gifts and limitations. That's humility, my dear melancholics. Now, if you are a phlegmatic, and this is the last one we'll talk about today, your approach to humility may look different as well. You may be easygoing, patient, cooperative, and perfectly comfortable allowing somebody else to take the lead. You may not need to be the center of attention, and that can be a beautiful gift. But there's something I want you to consider. Sometimes staying in the background isn't humility. Sometimes it's avoidance. You might say, well, somebody else can do it, or I'm happy to let somebody else lead, or I don't really need to be in charge. And sometimes that's the right response. But what if God gave you a particular gift because He wants you to use it? What if someone needs your voice? What if your parish needs your leadership? What if your family needs you to step forward in some way? What if your campus needs the perspective that only you can provide? In chapter 5 of Matthew, Jesus said, "Let your light shine before others." If you are a phlegmatic, part of your growth in humility may be learning to say yes to responsibility. So you could volunteer, you could speak up, lead a Bible study, chair a committee, share your idea, or use your gifts. And ask yourself, am I stepping back because I'm humble or because I'm comfortable, afraid, or unwilling to take responsibility? Your challenge is to move from somebody else can do it to God, make me available. Your gentleness and peacefulness are gifts, but humility doesn't mean making yourself small. It means making yourself available to God. So, what does humility look like for you? If you're sanguine, humility might mean, I don't need to be noticed. If you're choleric, humility might mean, I don't have to be in control. If you're melancholic, it could mean, I don't have to be perfect. If you're phlegmatic, humility might mean, I don't have to stay in the background. But underneath all four temperaments is the same truth. God created you intentionally. Your temperament is not a mistake. Your strengths are not something you need to apologize for, and your weaknesses aren't something you need to hide. And humility doesn't ask you to become someone else. Humility asks you to become the person that God created you to be, and then offer that person back to Him. That's why the words of St. John the Baptist are such a beautiful summary. He must increase, I must decrease. The goal isn't for the sanguine to become less joyful. It isn't for the choleric to become less courageous. It's not for the melancholic to become less conscientious or for the phlegmatic to become less peaceful. The goal is to create grace, to perfect the person God already created you to be. That's what humility looks like. Not thinking less of yourself, not thinking more of yourself, but thinking of God more and trusting truthfully in relationship to Him. I hope I've inspired you to add some humility to your life. And if you'd like to know more about your temperaments, I've added a link to a free temperaments assessment that you can take. It's in the show notes. I'm happy to coach you on your temperaments, so feel free to reach out. My email is also in the show notes. Before I close, if you haven't subscribed to Catholics on Campus yet, please do it today. And please do me a favor and like and share this podcast and make it your goal to share it with 5 people. Your support helps me to reach more listeners, and I really appreciate your help. Until next time, Mary, Untied of Knots, pray for us. God bless you.
If you are an ambitious college student who desires to leverage your God-given talents to live in beatitude and make a bold difference in the world, Dr. Virginia Cook can help you excel in your educational journey and grow in your Catholic identity. As founder of Knots Untied Coaching, Virginia offers mindset coaching from an authentically Catholic perspective and collegiate success and well-being strategies for happy, healthy, and holy living. Want to stay connected? Visit knotsuntied.com to learn how to join an amazing community of like-minded Catholic college students and their parents. You can also follow her on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook. Check out the show notes for links and special offers.